became very, very close friends throughout the course of her illness. She was my rock. My mother died of severe drug intoxication, according to the pathologist who did the reports. I know she did because I witnessed Betsy Bilyck administer these drugs, unbeknownst to me. There's only one logical conclusion that I could come up with, and that is that she was killing my mother. I am furious with the lack of support and response from not only the medical personnel involved, the medical examiner's office, who should have been held to much higher standards, the district attorney's office, who absolutely refused to follow through, the attorney general's office, who simply slapped the nurse on the wrist, and the fact that the criminal justice system still refuses to prosecute this nurse. I miss not being able to say goodbye.
Hospices are the absolute last place in the world that you would ever expect nurses or staff to mistreat or, God forbid, kill patients. And for Sylvia Forsmann, the thought never entered her mind when she sought a peaceful transition for her 81-year-old mother, Leah, to the Castro District's Coming Home Hospice, California Pacific Medical Center in San Francisco, California. But what she received was an experience so traumatic and so chilling that it could have been a plot to a Stephen King horror movie. The truth can really be stranger than fiction, and this story demonstrates the willingness of some hospice nurses to take it upon themselves to deliberately end the lives of patients under their care. Sylvia's and Leah's deadly nightmare began when Sylvia called on-duty nurse Betsy Bilyck to attend to her mother's frequent coughing. The nurse administered a hefty dose of atropine, and an hour later, Leah Forsmann awoke struggling to breathe. Bilyck returned and continued to administer more of the drug. Sylvia suspected foul play too late. By the time she called the paramedics, her mother had died. A private pathologist, the Glen Oaks Pathology Medical Group, discovered enough oxycodone, morphine, and atropine in her mother's system to kill 7 horses, and concluded that the manner of death was homicide. Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in honor of my mother, the Leah Forsmann story, to examine in depth how Sylvia's lawyer, Chris Dolan at the Dolan law firm, successfully represented Sylvia in the pursuit of justice for her mom. No other lawyers would handle this case because of the fact that Leah was just several days from dying, so there was no damages which lawyers felt would justify the work in this case. Chris Dolan brought the case in the interest of justice under an elder abuse statute with the understanding that his firm would be unlikely to receive compensation for their efforts, but under the premise that no one other than God and oneself should make a decision when it's time to die. Hi, I'm Steve Murphy, and this is the Insider Exclusive, live from San Francisco. It is my great pleasure to introduce Chris Dolan to the show. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
I love San Francisco every time I have a chance to come up here, and you made it possible. And we're going to talk today about a very unusual case. But before we get into the case, I want our audience to know a little bit about what your law firm is all about. What kind of practice areas do you specialize in?
Well, my practice area is representing people who found themselves in a position of trouble or a position where there's been an imbalance of power. I could work for any corporation anywhere if I want to, but I don't. So what I see myself doing in my practice is rebalancing power and helping people at their most desperate moments to get a foothold, to get back on track, and ultimately to be victorious.
Let's talk about this case. This is a case about Leah Forsmann. You represented her daughter on behalf of her mother. Who was Leah?
Leah Forsmann was a beautiful woman who had led a life that she was very proud of, and a life in which she and her daughter were very close.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a woman who was approaching death, and she was trying to have a death with dignity on her terms. She had metastatic cancer, she had been in pain, and she was dying.
And her daughter, Sylvia, brought her to a hospice.
Well, her daughter Sylvie had spoken with the hospital that had been treating her mother up until the point that the hospital said death is inevitable.
Yes.
And they recommended that her mother go to the Coming Home Hospice because they said that this was a facility that had been doing this for the longest period in time.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that her mother would be comfortable, safe, and well treated, and that it was what they call a JCO accredited facility, which meant it met the highest standards in providing medical care.
And that isn't exactly what happened there, is it?
No, it was untrue that they were even accredited.
Really?
No, they weren't. It was a complete fraud that their materials said they were JCO accredited, and they were not.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened there was, instead of Leah Forsmann receiving the ability to have death with dignity on her terms, a nurse there decided to give her death on the nurse's terms.
Yeah. That nurse was Nurse Betsy Bilyck?
Betsy Bilyck was the nurse who on that evening gave drugs without question to Leah Forsmann that killed her.
When she gave Leah the drugs that she wasn't supposed to be getting in the first place, she started gaggling, didn't she?
On the day of Leah Forsmann's death,
Yeah.
the operative notes from the nurses in the morning and afternoon shift said she was fine.
Yeah.
When Betsy Bilyck came on that evening for her shift, she started writing dying, dying, dying on the chart. While Sylvia was there was no noticeable change until Betsy Bilyck started injecting large quantities of medicine into Leah Forsmann's throat, and Leah Forsmann began drowning in her own fluids.
Now, Sylvia was there almost all the time, wasn't she, present with her mother?
Sylvie loved her mom, and Sylvie spent every hour that she could with her mom. But like most people, Sylvie also had to have a job because somebody needed to pay for her mother's care.
Absolutely. You know, we happened to have a 911 call that Sylvie made from the hospice when she couldn't get the nurse to do what she wanted. She wanted the suctioning equipment because her mother was drowning in her own spit, wasn't she?
Well, in this case, Sylvia Forsmann had a legal power of attorney for health care for her mother.
Yes.
So she was authorized by law, and the hospice had to respond to her by law to make health care decisions. And Sylvia was begging for suction for her mother. And she asked for them to get medical care. And instead of getting that medical care, Betsy Bilyck kept coming in and shoving more liquid medications down Leah's throat.
I want us to just listen to this 911 call because it's probably the worst 911 call one can ever hear or ever make on behalf of your mother, especially when you're at a place where they're supposed to be helping you. So let's listen to that right now.
What's wrong with your mother?
She's dying, but she's choking on her own spit, and they refuse.
Why want the hospice people refusing to help? Do they have a reason?
Not a good one, as far as I'm concerned.
What is it?
Doesn't matter. I want someone here quick.
Okay, what is the reason, ma'am?
They don't have the equipment on hand, and I want them here quickly. Please, this is an emergency. I've got a nurse with an ego here. I need to...
Okay,
And are they coming? Did you send the ambulance?
Is she completely awake?
Yes. Did you send the ambulance?
Is she changing color? Ma'am, you have to answer these questions. I am sending the paramedic.
Now, I understand, Chris, that when the police arrived, and the police did come, that the nurse actually tried to prevent the police from coming in Leah's room, right?
The nurse tried to prevent them from coming into the facility. She literally tried to bar them at the door. And they said to her, "You need to get out of the way." And then she berated them.
This is unbelievable, isn't it? It's totally unbelievable. And in fact, when Sylvia first came to you with this story, even here it was difficult to believe, wasn't it?
It was difficult to imagine that anywhere that this could occur.
Yeah.
And the story seemed so outrageous that it was hard to believe that it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as our population ages, they should be aware that as they age, the law, because of the way that the doctors have structured things, decreases their value legally. So, in the law also restricts the amount that attorneys can recover in these cases.
Yeah. Making it economically impossible for them to represent them.
Well,
basically.
In this case, there were two features that made it extremely difficult. We had a woman, by all accounts, that was dying.
Yes.
And so with the way the law looks at it is they value the loss of the relationship between the mother and the daughter. And they look at the length of time that that relationship was taken away.
Right.
So this case, ultimately, we decided not to take in any way as an issue of money or economics, but because there is a very important public policy issue that is facing America, that Sylvia Forsmann had to face herself alone under the most horrific of circumstances.
Yes. Now, as a result of this case, as a result of the medical examiner's report, which you and your client did not agree with initially, and do not agree with right now, you had a private autopsy report done, which we're going to show on the screen right now. And basically, the end result of this private autopsy report is that they determined that Leah Forsmann was killed, wasn't she? She died of a homicide, right?
The system repeatedly failed Sylvia Forsmann and Leah Forsmann. The own medical examiner of the city and county of San Francisco refused to look at this case in analyzing whether or not it was a homicide,
Right.
because they saw this woman as dispensable.
Yeah.
She was dying. So ultimately, Sylvia Forsmann had to go out with her own funds and have her mother be examined by a truly independent individual, a doctor, a pathologist,
Yes.
who unequivocally, by doing the proper examination, determined that this was a death
Yeah.
of homicide.
In the course of prosecuting this case, you deposed Nurse Bilyck. And we have a few clips that we're going to show right now. And basically, these are clips where it says she admitted she administered opiates against doctors' instructions, right?
This was an amazing thing. It was unusual in my career. After hours and hours of depositions with this woman, we finally cracked the truth. And she admitted that she violated her license, and on her own, she began to administer lethal medications, opiates,
Yes.
that she knew
Would kill her.
would shut down this woman's respiratory system and advance and hasten her death.
Yeah. We're going to go to that right now because this is truly amazing, and I think it's never been shown in public before, so let's do that.
Made this alteration to the record, you understood that Sylvia Forsmann was upset with the treatment that her mother was receiving in the hospital when you made this late entry, correct? Ma'am?
I'm thinking. Yes.
Do you understand that these end-stage medications can also cause death if they're given in sufficient quantity?
Answer the question.
Yes.
Did you tell her at any point in time the medications that I'm giving to your mother might kill her?
No.
Did you ever get approval from her to administer the medications, or did you just administer them to her, that is her mother, and explain to Sylvie what you were doing? It's a very clear, I'm asking whether you asked for permission to do it from Sylvie before you started giving the oxyfast, or did you just give it to her mother and tell her your reason for doing so?
No.
The two main issues that you wanted to prove in this case that you had to overcome, the legal hurdles, were what?
Well, the legal hurdles to be overcome were, could we prove that this was a death by design
Yes.
rather than a natural cause? Meaning, could we prove through the records or get someone to admit that the law was violated and that this was in essence one of those, quote, angel of death cases,
Yes.
where you have a nurse who believes that she knows more than the doctors,
Yeah.
and that she knows more than the family.
Mm-hmm.
And she took the decision away from Leah Forsmann and Sylvia Forsmann, the decision as to how and when death would occur. And no one should make that decision besides the individual themselves and God. And this woman played God.
Right. We have, fortunately, Sylvia with us right now. Sylvie. So let's bring Sylvia on right now. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sylvia Forsmann to the show. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I know it's a difficult situation, and you were close to your mom, weren't you?
Very.
What is, what I think Chris and I talked about this a little bit, about the difficulty in finding a lawyer to represent you in this matter, because nobody believed you, did they?
No one ever believed me, from the hospice management to the medical examiner.
What did they say to you? You can't be right. They wouldn't do that to anybody, right?
Basically, they just dismissed me. They didn't, it was like I wasn't talking. They couldn't hear me.
You have certain opinions about certain governmental officials that we'd like to hear a little bit more about. For example, the medical examiner's office, who did not rule that your mother's death was a homicide. What do you have to say about them?
Oh, I have nothing positive to say about the medical examiner's office in San Francisco at that time. I'm not sure who's managing the office now, but not only at the scene where the gentleman who came to investigate the scene, I was totally dismissed by him.
We're talking about the medical examiner or the police department?
He was part of the medical examiner's team, the investigator for the medical examiner. He dismissed what I tried to tell him.
Did they call you a liar, or did they say you're crazy, or what did they say?
In not so many words.
Really?
In not so many words.
I mean, here they see a distressed daughter who cannot be making this stuff up, and they're just dismissing you. It's just amazing.
Well, and the nurses' facility, the hospice facility, did nothing to dispel that. They actually tried to convince everyone that I was just an hysterical daughter.
Yeah. I could see that maybe at the time that it happened, but not for years and years and years after that, right?
I did not have a hysterical moment.
The private autopsy report ruled that your mother was killed. It was a homicide.
That's right.
Why doesn't that have any impact with the then district attorney's office?
I'm not sure.
What do you think, Chris?
I can't get in their minds.
Because this was a woman who was in her older years, who was nearing death, I think they felt that it really didn't matter. We even sent them the video of the admission from the nurse.
Yeah.
Nothing.
It's when you're old, when you're sick, nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Sylvie, tell us a little bit about what went on when you made that initial 911 call from the hospice.
Frustration beyond belief. And when I told this nurse I was going to call 911, she says, "Oh, no, you're not." I said, "Oh, yes, I am." And she said, "If you do that, I am going to lock them out of the building."
This is amazing.
It was like being in a twilight zone. It was
You know, in this
bizarre.
hospice, there had to be other staff members besides this Nurse Bilyck, correct?
Not at night.
Not at night.
Very few. She was the only LVN.
We certainly appreciate you taking your time to be on the program today.
Thank you.
Our condolences for what happened.
Thank you.
And I'm glad there was some sort of justice in this case. Somebody was held responsible. At least that Nurse Bilyck is no longer practicing, I understand, in the state. Is that correct?
Well, my understanding is that was a short suspension of her license, and that's another story.
Yeah.
I checked yesterday. She doesn't have a license anymore here.
I want to thank you very much for being on the program. Your message is a powerful message, and we'll be sure to get it out.
Thank you.
Chris, I want to thank you very much for being with us today on this program. We were particularly interested in this case because a lot of people think lawyers do things for only money. But the bottom line is you took this case in the interests of justice, didn't you?
I took this case not only in the interest of justice, but to stand for everyone, including my own family and my own mother. I took this to heart.
Yeah. Well, that's great, and I'm glad you did, and I want to thank you very much again for being on the program.
Thanks very much for not only having me here, but for making sure that this message gets out to your viewers.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.